Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for listening in. Today, we're going to talk about the 5 financial moves you need to make today, or you need to think about today. I'm excited because this is the core concept of the On Time, On Target podcast are these 5 steps. But before we get into that, as a reminder, this is an educational show and should not be construed as personal financial advice. Full disclosure information is available at ototnow.com. Now let's get started. So, we talked briefly in the last episode about what the purpose of investing actually is, right? You talked about you have time and energy and no money. Adults, you have energy and money and no time. Then when you're retired, you have money and time and no energy. So to combat all of that, that paradox, if you will, we need to invest during our lifetimes to make it up to a certain amount of money. But really, to break that down even further into the 5 different steps of what you need to do can make it more sense on figuring out where you are in that process to make sure that you are doing the right things today that will get you to the place that you actually want to go. So, for those that know me, I spent my career in the Air Force flying airplanes, flew the F-15, flew the F-117, and pilots, especially single seat pilots, are notorious for their planning. Very meticulous, almost paranoid, if you will. We spend a lot of our time, planning out the mission and then assuming what are all the things that are going to go wrong, what are all the contingencies along the way, and that's what we talk about are the contingencies, because we know if the mission goes well, we're going to go in and hit the target, or we're going to go from A to B safely. Whatever your mission is, we know how to do that. So that's why I bring that to you now in the form of this podcast. And these are the planning things that you can think about and 5 particular steps. And when a pilot starts to think about things, they think about, where are we? Where am I parked? How am I going to get out to the runway? How am I going to exit the local area as far as the departure and all that? So knowing where you are is the first thing we're going to talk about. So that is step 1. And everybody's in a different place. You could be surviving debt. You have to be adult about where you are. And if you are in debt, then the first thing you need to do is worry about getting out of debt, not necessarily working on other stuff. So if you're in debt, get out of debt. You might be working on your emergency fund, kind of just getting started, getting yourself set up for success, that sort of thing. You might be heavily involved in investing in 401ks, IRAs to take care of yourself in retirement. Once you have that set, you might be into the college savings, or you might have several of these things going at one time. And I add that last because there's student loans, but there are no retirement loans, is what I like to say. So you need to make sure you focus on yourself first. Yes, be selfish financially before you start taking care of your kids. And I talked about having more than one thing working at a time. Well, another pilot analogy that I like to use is the concept of a financial engine. And as you know, airplanes have different numbers of engines. Single seat fighters, some fighters have 1 engine, some have 2. You get all the way up to bombers with 8 engines. But basically, the more engines you have working for you, the more options you have. So if you have kind of one job and no investments, then that's a single financial engine situation. You might have 2 or 3 jobs, which are all their own independent engines that are working and still have no investments, and you still have multiple ways to work towards your goal. If you have 1 or more jobs and multiple investments, like a 401k at work, you have your IRA going on personally, maybe you're married and have 2 of each of those cooking for you, as well as possibly a college savings for 1 or more children. Those are all multiple financial engines that are working and helping you get to your goals. So the first step 1, as a recap, know where you are and know the total number of engines that you have working for you. And then second step is to know if you're on track. And that's the next 5 episodes that I'm going to do for the podcast are to really focus in on different age groups. So you can skip, and if you're interested, if you're curious, then you can hear what I'm going to say at each of the different ages. But if you want to just skip ahead to the one that applies to you, please do so, because I want you to fully kind of get your mind around am I or am I not on track? And that's not easy to do. It's easy to get started when you're younger and start building up this portfolio. Most of the people, it's through their 401k, maybe it's through IRAs, maybe it's both, but you don't really know, am I on track to where I need to go? Because you kind of have to think about where it is you're going before you can figure out if you're on track, right? So I break it down in terms of age and net worth. So these are not perfect numbers, but these are guidelines to help you know whether you're on track. So in your 20s, you're in the workforce probably and making an income. And in this case, we're going to call it a salary. And your annual salary is whatever it is. So I tend to use 100,000 because that can make the math easy. I know not everybody has a six-figure job in their 20s, but that's more of a math thing. So when I give you examples, it's a little easier to follow the math audibly, right? than having to do more complex stuff. But when you think in your 20s, you should just be, getting started and start saving and investing and get as many engines as you can going for you. So by the time you're age 35, you should have 1 times your annual salary in net worth. So if you make $60,000, you should have $60,000 of net worth, meaning let's look at your 401k balances, your IRA, the equity that you have in your home. Basically across the board, it should all add up to at least 1 times your annual salary. When you're 45, you should have 3 times your annual salary. And these are kind of minimums. Again, everybody's retirement's different, but think about it. If you're a six-figure type person, makes 100,000, by the time you're 45, you should have $300,000 in total across your home equity and your different investments. In another 10 years, by the age 55, you should have 7 times your annual salary saved. You're like, whoa, that's huge. Well, don't forget that 300,000, if you will, the 3x in 10 years is, if you have it invested correctly, is going to double. So really, you're letting the power of money making money, the magic of compound interest and the rule of 72, which I won't go into now, but you're letting all of that work for you to where the money you have invested is going to double, and you're just really only adding on another annual salary. And if I have every 10 years, and if you're doing that every 10 years, you can think quick math tells you, well, if I'm adding one annual salary, say $100,000 every 10 years, well, that's 10,000 a year, that's 10%. So these numbers are all based on 10% and the magic of compound interest. So then 10 years later, when you're 65, remember at 55, you have 7x your salary. Well, that 7x should have grown to 14x by the time you're 65, and then you add on one more because you're still saving and investing, so that gives you 15 times your annual salary. So if you have somebody who makes $100,000 and works till age 65, they should have 1.5 million in their portfolio. So those are numbers you can kind of hang your hat on depending on where you are, what you make, and are you ahead or behind of schedule. And then you can make adjustments from there. So this track basically delivers about 60% of your income replacement in retirement. So if you're a $100,000 person and you get up to 1.5 million, that should give you about, I'm not sure I said that correctly. If you're a $100,000 salary type person, and I know that increases generally over a career, but on average, when you get to your retirement, you should have 1.5 million, which at 4% now turns around and kicks off 60,000 a year. So this whole plan is based on you replacing about 60% of your income from your portfolio. You add that to the amount of Social Security that you're going to get, or what's going to be there for you when it's all said and done, and that's an unknown as well, and that gets your total income. So between those two and the fact that when you're in retirement, you don't have to save for retirement anymore, which again is another 15%, this gets you on track to where you can have the proper amount of income replacement in retirement. Okay, let's move on to number 3. The third step that you need to be doing and thinking about right now is defending against known threats and mitigating others. So what are known threats? Well, life has catastrophic events, and we know these things happen. That's why we have insurance. So when you can think in general, you have life insurance, home insurance, car insurance, and health insurance, kind of the four big insurance areas out there. So life insurance, if you're not self-insured, i.e. you're not financially independent, then you need to buy life insurance to cover a catastrophic event should something happen to you. And it does depend on the amount of life insurance you need, depends on the amount of money that person generates in income. And so you need to kind of tailor it appropriately. Some people like to take insurance and investing and put it all together and confuse you and sell it to you as part of like a whole life policy. Um, really try to figure out what you have if that's the route you're going, because those are extremely expensive. And the word premium is right there, meaning you're paying a premium, which means you are not, it's negative expected value. You're paying more for what you're likely to get from this. So just consider that. But you do need to have, to defend against your known threats, have that insurance in place like we do with home and car insurance in case something happens. And again, you hope it doesn't. Those are the known threats. The kind of unknown threats, the you don't know what you don't know, is losing your job. You walk in and the company lays off 10% and you're caught up in that. Sickness is something you have no control over. We happen to be going through or in the middle of, who knows where we are, of the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic right now. And if you catch that, you are going to be, it's nasty stuff, right? So you're going to be hospitalized, and then possibly after that, you might be quarantined for a matter of time. So again, that can be an unknown threat. Divorce, I would say, is unknown because you just don't know when it's going to happen or if it's going to happen. And those are just some examples. Also, I say gaining dependence, meaning not necessarily how much, how many children you're going to have, because you probably have a plan there. But as far as possibly children that don't leave the nest, when they hit kind of that 18-year-old, they stay home, so they stay dependents for longer. Or more likely scenario is actually the parents returning back into your home and becoming your dependent again. So when I talk to folks, it's not only your children and trying to get them out to be productive members of society, but it's also what happens to your parents. Are they going to return as a dependent or not, or what's the likelihood of that? So again, that's all an unknown. But the bottom line there is you basically need to have protection in place through insurance. And then once you have that, you need to have your emergency fund. Traditionally, that's 3 to 6 months pay. If you make 6 figures or above, that is a lot of money just to have sitting there. So generally you can manage it with credit lines as well. But certainly if you have less than 6 figures, you need to be in a, let's just have 3 to 6 months pay set aside in case something happens. Okay, so that's step 3, is defend against known threats and mitigate others. Step 4 of the 5 is study each target you want to hit. So again, using the airplane analogy, we don't just take off and randomly go places, right? That would be terrible. So you plan to go in and hit maybe 1, 2, 3, or multiple targets if you happen to be in the business of doing that. Or if you're making deliveries, maybe you're going from A to B, such like as an airliner delivering its passengers from A to where they want to go, or possibly there's multiple stops along the way. We have to plan for each of those. So only you know your financial goals, but when you think about your goals, your first goal, or your only goal probably, if you are in debt, is to get out of debt. That's, the debt monster is ugly. And once you're in it, you basically use future dollars to pay for your lifestyle now. And that has a huge cost to it. So you need to focus really on just getting out of debt, period. And then after that, you could have several different goals, kind of like those financial engines. You can have several different goals of, you want to buy a house, you're saving for retirement, you're saving for college, saving for travel, whatever it is you want to do out there, but you have a plan in place and you're kind of studying each plan and asking yourself, am I on track to hit that target? So as you have short-term targets, which might be just saving enough to buy a car, or possibly if you're a teenager, saving enough to buy the next new phone or the next video game or video game console or whatever it is, those are all short-term kind of targets. Well, you don't want to sacrifice your long-term targets there, so you got to keep those in mind as well. So your long-term target, you do need to have a little bit of an understanding of what you're trying to do financially while you're here on the planet. And before you're probably, I don't know, 40 years old, you probably don't really need to know that. You just need to go be a productive member of society, make some money, take care of yourself, take care of your family, do good things. But at some point, you need to transition your mindset to go, what am I actually trying to do financially? If you don't know, then it will just be random. And that's not what we're trying to do here. We're trying to figure out specifically. There is the type of person, and like everybody's different. So I'm not trying to judge any of these. That is just trying to make the finish line. In a perfect world, they would spend their lifetime accruing. You go from, um, you know, having no money as a kid, broke, and then you become rich or wealthy, if whatever state you're in, and then you're trying to make it to the finish line and use every single dollar that you've made and hit zero, basically. So you're bouncing the checks for your own funeral, right? Or you're just covering it, if you will. That's one way of people that are trying to aggressively spend down their funds. So they use every dollar they've ever made while they're here. I would say that's uncommon. There's obviously some risk in that. If you outlive, which, if you live a lot longer than you expect to live, then you could be broke again in your 90s, like you were, in your first 10 years on the planet. There's also those that want to just be able to fund all three stages of retirement. The reason I say three stages, there's the go-go phase, which is the expensive, i.e. we or you just retired and you want to get out and do all those things that you've always wanted to do, and you've got the money, time, and energy to do it. That's the go-go phase. Then there's the slow-go phase, where you don't quite feel up to it energy-wise. So you start to take less trips, do less things, just be from an energy perspective. And then there's kind of the no-go phase, where whether it's either just age, because age happens, or some sort of health issue that prevents you really from going anywhere or doing very little, and that's your no-go phase. So I say, long-term goal is to be able to fund all three stages of retirement. And if you're a couple, it would be for both partners in the couple. And then another long-term goal is, to get the house paid off and have a vacation home in the Hamptons. Obviously, that's going to take like a lot more money to not only make sure that you make the finish line, you're good for retirement, and now you've paid off your house and you've got vacation homes. That's kind of that next level. That's going to take more. So if you're planning on that, if that's the future you envision, you need to figure out what you need to do now to get there. And then the last one I throw out there is multi-generational wealth. Some folks are trying to build enough wealth to where their families are taken care of long after their passing. So whatever your goal is, just know what it is so you can do the things that you need to do now to make that goal. And the last step of it is just like flying. As circumstances change, you have to change your plan. So you need to think about contingencies. We all hear there's no plan of attack survives the first contact with the enemy. Well, same thing financially. There are things that happen along the way. The new roof, the new air conditioner, those are big numbers. They can all just crop up all of a sudden. Well, that's what an emergency fund is for. Or if you use credit cards, put it on a credit card and then pay the credit card off by the time you figure out where the money is going to come from to cover that. So that's a contingency. So you may be on target today. That's why you have to come back and revisit where you are fairly often. You may be on target right now, but you're not on target tomorrow. Maybe, something happens. The unknowns out there happen. The biggest one I can think of is your health. So if something affects your health, maybe you're not able to continue working into your 50s or 60s. Well, if you're the primary wage earner, that's a big deal, not just for you, but for everybody that counts on you, right? Sometimes it's not just your health, it's the health of somebody in your family that now affects your ability to work. So a lot of different factors at play here. Just like flying, you're always constantly on the lookout for something that's going wrong so you can attack it and tackle it. And to help you with some of these contingencies, that's where a lot of folks use an advisor. And I'm not trying to sell you on the concept, but I will say this, is that everyone has a financial advisor. You're like, well, I don't. And you're like, well, yeah, you do. It's you. If you're not paying somebody else, then you're responsible for this, right? So, and everybody can be their own financial advisor. It's just there's a lot of stuff out there, and the more complex life gets and the more time laws change and things, that's where you may consider it worth your time. And if you're at the certain point financially, where you can easily afford to pay for somebody to, it's like somebody to cut your grass if you just don't feel like doing it anymore, or to take care of your house. Same thing with an advisor. It's you unless you pay somebody else to do it. So anybody can do it on their own. There's lots of rules out there. You just have to stay on top of it. So they can help you with things like, hey, Social Security, like you can forecast what you think you're going to get, but there needs to be some contingencies because it's a little bit of a moving target. They can help you with the 401k, IRA, whether you should be Roth or traditional, how to convert, why to convert, what are the tax implications. There's a bunch of things where an advisor can break it down for you very quickly, where if you learn it on your own, it may be a little bit frustrating, and most people tend to just put things off if they start getting frustrated, right? So that's what I've kind of got for you today for this episode. So thank you for listening in, and please reach out through ototnow.com if you have any questions or comments. And here's to you fighting the good fight every day to be on time, on target with your financial goals. Have a good one.